Oh, hey, hi, how are you? Today we have a bit of an important topic to discuss, and that is the difference between prescriptive and performance based safety legislation. Now, safety is pretty crucial in our daily lives, whether it's at work, on the road, or even at home. We need to understand these two types of safety legislation because it can help us grasp how laws, guidelines, and standards are designed to protect us. So let's look at this in three parts. First, what these types of legislation are, the pros and cons, and of course, the third thing, what they mean to you, the person responsible for safety in your organization. So let's not delay, shall we? Let's get on to it. First, let's start with prescriptive safety legislation. I want you to imagine you have a rule book that outlines every single step that you need to take, and you need to follow it to stay safe. Well, that's basically what prescriptive safety legislation is all about. It provides specific instructions, guidelines, and regulations and sets standards that everyone must adhere to. So, for example, in the workplace, prescriptive safety legislation might specify that workers have to use certain controls while performing certain tasks. A good example, prescriptive requirements for anchors used in fall protection. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. Different jurisdictions may have different requirements, but it's usually outlined in the legislation. Or another case, the legislation might outline that certain machinery can only be operated by certain users with specific certification. These rules leave little room for interpretation and ensure that everyone follows the same set of safety protocols, basically the same standards for everyone. Now, prescriptive safety legislation is great because it provides clarity and sets clear standards. However, critics argue that it can be sometimes very rigid and it may not address unique situations. Additionally, it can be challenging to keep up with constant changing rules, regulations, not to mention the pressure of external market demands and ever-changing technology, because what is in place today is certainly going to be outdated tomorrow. Okay, so let's move on to performance safety legislation. I want you to imagine that you have a goal in mind, but now, in this case, you're given the freedom to choose how you're going to get there, how you're going to achieve it. That's the idea behind performance safety legislation. Instead of specifying exactly what to do, it focuses on the outcome or performance level that needs to be achieved. For example, many jurisdictions will require employers to identify and control hazards before work begins, but they don't prescribe the intricate steps that need to be taken. In most cases, that is. This allows the employer to adapt their own workflows to meet a legislated requirement. And another example might be that you might consider is here in Alberta, there's no requirement for the frequency of inspections. They just have to happen because the employer is required to assess the workplace for hazards. Now, performance safety legislation is often praised for encouraging creativity and allowing businesses to find innovative ways to meet safety goals. However, critics argue that it can be subjective and open to interpretation. Sometimes it may not provide specific guidance on how to address unique safety risks. And without specific guidance, people tend to rely on their own judgment, which may be tainted by experience, or, at worst, the approach is a best guess process doing what they think is best. So let's look at the pros and cons with both types of safety legislation. With prescriptive safety legislation, well, the pros are it provides clear guidelines and standards and leaves little room for ambiguity, and it ensures consistency. The cons, on the other hand, can be very inflexible. It may not address unique situations, and it can be challenging to keep up with ever-changing legislation. Performance safety legislation, well, the pros are it encourages innovation and flexibility. It allows for creative solutions and can adapt to ever-evolving technologies. Well, as far as the cons go, it can be very subjective, it lacks specific guidance, and it may require more interpretation. So ultimately, the choice between prescriptive and performance safety legislation depends on the context and the end goal. Some situations may require a more prescriptive approach, while others may benefit from a performance-based approach. Let's look at what it means to you, the safety professional. You, of course, will be tasked with providing safety-related guidance to your coworkers And much of this is writing and reviewing and revising safe work procedures and other written documents. If the subject is something related to a subject under the authority of a prescriptive legislation, most of your task is easy, as most of the process will be outlined, prescribed if you will, within the legislation, most of which will include the standards you'll need to adhere to during the associated activities. However, if you're writing a document that is governed by a piece of performance-based legislation, you will more than likely have to research some standards, to look up different things, and base your document quite possibly on information that you may borrow from governing bodies and published industry best practices. So likely a lot more work for you, but honestly, in the end, that work will be worth it because you're going to have a process tailored to your particular workplace and your workflow. Now, if you want to know more about writing safe work documents, you can check out this short series that starts with this video right here. But it isn't necessarily about having well-written documents. It's about being a safety leader. You don't need to be a manager, a supervisor, or even a safety professional. You just have to lead by example. Be that safety influencer. Talk about safety and provoke safety by being that safety leader. Okay? Take care. Bye for now.